Winter in the city didn't arrive gently. It settled in hard, sharp, and unforgiving. The air cut through coats and skin alike, turning breath into pale smoke beneath the streetlights. Snow clung to the pavement and gathered along the edges of a small park, where a single bench sat exposed to the night. On it, Alyssa Sanchez sat motionless, her shoulders curved inward as she wrapped herself around her children. The twins were quiet, too quiet. One leaned against her side, the other pressed into her chest, their small bodies sharing what little warmth she had left to give. Alyssa adjusted her coat again and again, not because it helped, but because stopping meant admitting how cold they really were. Cars passed. Footsteps echoed, then faded. No one stopped. Her phone vibrated weakly in her hand. The screen dimmed, the battery nearly gone. She stared at a name saved from a life she no longer lived, someone she hadn't spoken to in years, someone she told herself she would never need again. Pride told her to put the phone away. The cold told her not to wait. Her fingers trembled as she typed a short message, keeping it simple, keeping it small. "Can we stay somewhere warm tonight? Just until morning. The kids are freezing." She hit send. Across the city, high above the streets, Jonathan Jacob stepped out of a late meeting into the quiet glow of polished glass and marble. His day had been measured, controlled. Numbers, decisions, outcomes. The warmth of the building pressed in around him as his phone buzzed in his pocket. He barely glanced at it at first. Then he stopped. The message was short. The words were familiar, and the name at the top of the screen dragged 6 buried years back into his chest all at once. Alyssa. Jonathan stared at the screen, the world narrowing to a single thought. Why is she asking for shelter? And who are the kids? Before you begin, please take a moment to relax and enjoy the story. If you find it engaging, do me a small favor. Subscribe, like, and share to support the channel. I'd also love to hear from you, so feel free to comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your support means a lot and helps grow our community. The bench had long ago stopped feeling like wood. It was just another surface now, cold seeping through layers of fabric, through muscle, into bone. Alyssa shifted slightly, careful not to wake the twins pressed against her sides. Lucas's head rested beneath her chin, his breath uneven but steady. Lily was curled into her coat, small fingers fisted in the wool as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. The city moved without noticing them. Cars hissed over wet pavement, a bus passed, windows glowing, faces turned inward. Somewhere nearby, laughter spilled out of a bar doorway before the door shut and swallowed the warmth again. Alyssa pulled her arms tighter around the children, not because it helped much, but because letting go felt impossible. She had promised herself she wouldn't do this. She had promised herself that no matter how thin things got, no matter how many nights blurred together, she wouldn't reach out. Pride wasn't a luxury she could afford, but it was the last thing that still felt like hers. Her phone rested heavy in her palm. The screen was dimmer than it should have been. A red sliver clung to the battery icon like a warning she didn't want to read. She tilted it closer to her face, shielding it from the wind, and watched as the cold slowed everything, her fingers, her thoughts, her resolve. Lucas shifted, a small sound escaping his throat. Alyssa froze, heart stuttering, until he settled again. She brushed a kiss into his hair, then Lily's, whispering nothing at all. "I'm trying," she thought, not sure who she was saying it to. Hunger had a way of making time feel loud, each minute stretched, marked by the ache in her stomach and the dull throb behind her eyes. She had stretched what little money she had left as far as it could go. Tonight, there was nothing left to stretch. The wind cut sharper, sneaking under coats, finding skin. Alyssa pressed her forehead briefly against the twins' heads, drawing strength from their warmth, however small it was. She looked down at the phone again. The contact list felt heavier than it should have. Names scrolled past, people she hadn't spoken to in years, people she had already asked too much of, people who had stopped answering long ago. Family was a dead end. Old friends had their own lives now. She didn't blame them. Her thumb hovered. This was the moment she always stopped. This was where she usually told herself they could last a little longer, that morning would come, that something would break their fall. But the twins shivered. Not dramatically, not enough to cry, just enough. That was what did it. Alyssa swallowed and tapped the name she had memorized even when she pretended she hadn't. Sophie. Not family, not close anymore, but safe ones. Kind, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions tonight. The message field opened. Her fingers were stiff, movements clumsy. She typed slowly, stopping twice to delete words that felt like too much. Can we stay with you tonight? Just until morning. The kids are freezing. She stared at the words, chest tight. They looked small on the screen, smaller than the weight they carried. For a moment she considered erasing everything. The battery dipped another fraction. She exhaled, the breath trembling more than she wanted to admit, and pressed send. The phone buzzed softly in her hand, the tiny confirmation oddly loud in the quiet around her. Alyssa locked the screen immediately, as if not looking could somehow undo it. She didn't see the number, didn't notice the missing digit, the subtle shift that turned one contact into another, didn't see the location tag that attached itself automatically, glowing faintly beneath the text like a beacon. She slid the phone into her coat to preserve what little power remained and pulled the twins closer. The bench was still cold, the night was still long, but somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the exhaustion, something loosened, just enough to breathe. Alyssa leaned back against the metal frame, eyes closing for a second she told herself would be brief. Snow drifted down, catching in her hair, settling on her shoulders. She brushed none of it away. She didn't know the message was already moving, didn't know it was vibrating in a pocket 4 blocks away, interrupting a life that had never imagined this version of her. She only knew that the cold was relentless and morning felt very far off. And she waited. Jonathan Jacobs stepped out of the glass tower into air that felt sharper than it had any right to be. The doors slid shut behind him, sealing away warmth, light, and the low hum of a building that never slept. For a moment he stood still, breath fogging faintly, listening to the city settle into its late-night rhythm. Another meeting finished, another decision signed off on, another problem reduced to numbers and margins, control intact. He adjusted his coat and started toward the waiting car when his phone vibrated in his hand. Jonathan almost ignored it. At this hour, messages were usually predictable. Updates from overseas markets, a delayed driver, a reminder he didn't need. He glanced down out of habit, thumb already preparing to dismiss whatever it was. Then he saw the name. Alyssa Sanchez. The world narrowed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no rush of sound, no cinematic silence, just a sudden, precise stillness, as if time itself had been asked to pause and decided to comply. He stopped walking. The name sat on the screen, unadorned, unexplainable. Not a contact he thought he still had, not a name he expected to see again in this lifetime. 6 years had passed since the last time he'd heard it spoken aloud, and even then it had been followed by excuses, deflections, and a door closing quietly behind her. Jonathan stared at the screen, pulse steady but heavy. His first thought was that it couldn't be real, a mislabel, a coincidence, someone else with the same name. His second thought was that it was a mistake meant for someone else. He opened the message. "Can we stay with you tonight?"
Just until morning. The kids are freezing. Jonathan read it once, then again. The words were simple, careful, nothing dramatic, and yet they pressed against his chest with a weight he hadn't felt in years. The kids. He didn't breathe. 1,000 questions rose at once, tangled and sharp, but none of them made it past the stillness. His gaze dropped to the bottom of the screen, to the small detail he hadn't noticed at first. A location tag blinked softly, automatically attached, precise, unavoidable. 4 blocks away. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Distance had always been his refuge. Distance and time, tools that made hard things manageable, explainable, ignorable. But the glowing dot on the map erased all of that. It wasn't a memory reaching out to him. It wasn't a ghost from a life he'd already buried. It was now. He locked the phone and unlocked it again, as if the message might disappear if challenged. It didn't. The name was still there, the words unchanged, the location waiting. Alyssa. Images surfaced without permission, not clear scenes, just fragments. The way she used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the quiet resolve in her eyes when she thought she was being underestimated, the last argument that hadn't felt like an ending until it already was. She had left without asking for help. She had left without explanation, and now she was asking. Jonathan exhaled slowly. He glanced up at the dark street, at the car idling near the curb. The driver straightened when he saw Jonathan stop, question already forming on his face. Jonathan raised a hand slightly, a silent signal to wait. This was ridiculous, he told himself. There were a dozen reasons not to respond, 100 practical concerns. Entire departments existed to handle situations that complicated, that messy. He didn't know what this was. He didn't know what she wanted. He didn't know if the message was even meant for him. And yet, the thought of doing nothing felt heavier than any consequence he could name. The kids are freezing. He unlocked the phone again, this time not to reread the message, but to open the map. The blue dot pulsed steadily, indifferent to his hesitation. Jonathan didn't analyze it further. He didn't call anyone, didn't send a reply, didn't prepare an explanation for himself. He closed the app, slipped the phone into his pocket, and turned toward the car. "Change of plans," he said quietly as he opened the door. The driver nodded, without question. As the car pulled away from the tower, the city lights shifting around them, Jonathan leaned back and stared out the window. Snow had begun to fall, light and steady, softening edges, blurring the familiar into something uncertain. He didn't know what waited for him 4 blocks away, didn't know why his hands were tight in his lap, or why his chest felt the way it did. He only knew that for the first time in years, control had loosened its grip, and he was letting it. The car slowed as the streetlights thinned, their glow stretching longer across the pavement. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the sidewalk, the park just beyond it half swallowed by snow and shadow. The city here felt quieter, as if it were holding its breath. "Here?" the driver asked softly. Jonathan nodded. The car stopped, the engine idled, warmth lingered inside, reluctant to let go. Jonathan opened the door anyway. Cold rushed in immediately, sharp and unapologetic. It bit at his face, seeped through the seams of his coat, reminded him, viscerally, of why the message had been sent in the first place. He stepped onto the sidewalk. Across the street, beneath a flickering streetlight, sat a single bench dusted with snow, and on it, Alyssa. She was smaller than he remembered, or maybe the night made her seem that way. Her shoulders were drawn inward, posture curved not in weakness but in instinct, arms wrapped tightly around 2 small figures pressed against her sides. The twins. They were bundled in coats too big for them, sleeves swallowing their hands. One leaned into her chest, the other sat upright, eyes open and alert. Neither was sleeping. Jonathan stopped moving. For a long moment he simply stood there, breath visible in the air, heart beating loud enough that he wondered if anyone else could hear it. Elisa hadn't seen him yet. Her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the park, unfocused, as if she were counting something only she could see, minutes maybe, or the slow drain of her phone battery as it rested dark in her palm. Jonathan took a step forward. Snow crunched beneath his shoe. Her head lifted. The moment their eyes met, 6 years collapsed into a single fragile second. There was no shock on her face, no anger, just a quiet, stunned recognition that mirrored his own, as if she had known, on some level, that this was always how the night would end. "Jonathan," she said. His name didn't sound like an accusation, it sounded like a fact. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Words felt intrusive, unnecessary. The streetlight hummed softly above them, casting pale light across her face, catching in her hair, illuminating the fine lines of exhaustion he hadn't noticed in his memories. "I didn't mean to," Elisa started, then stopped. She glanced down at the children, instinctively tightening her hold on them before looking back up. "The message wasn't supposed to go to you." "I know," Jonathan said. His voice surprised him, steady, controlled, as if this were just another negotiation, another late-night complication to be handled carefully. Silence settled again. The child on her left, the boy, watched him closely, not with fear, with curiosity. His eyes were dark, observant, too serious for someone so small. The girl leaned further into Elisa, but her gaze flicked up as well, studying Jonathan from under the edge of her hood. Children who knew how to read rooms. Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest, subtle but undeniable. "They're cold," Elisa said, quietly, not pleading, just stating what was already obvious. "I know," he replied. He took another step closer, stopping a respectful distance away, close enough now to see the faint redness on the children's cheeks, the way Elisa's gloves were worn thin at the fingertips, the tension in her jaw as if she were braced for something he hadn't done yet. "I can—" He paused, adjusted. "You don't have to explain anything, not here." Her eyes searched his face, wary, measuring. "I wasn't going to." Another stretch of silence passed, this one heavier than the last. The boy tilted his head slightly, still watching Jonathan. There was something unsettlingly familiar in the angle of it, in the shape of his brow, in the way his gaze didn't waver. Jonathan swallowed. Elisa followed his line of sight. Her arms tightened around the twins almost imperceptibly, protective but not defensive. "They're tired," she said. "We all are." Jonathan nodded once. He glanced back toward the waiting car, its lights dim, the driver still inside, then back to the bench. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't an order, it wasn't even persuasive, just an opening. Elisa hesitated, not long, just enough for Jonathan to see the weight of 6 years pressing against the choice in front of her. Finally, she stood. The twins slid from the bench slowly, stiff from cold. Jonathan instinctively stepped forward, then stopped himself. He watched as Elisa adjusted their coats, brushed snow from their shoulders, whispered something too soft to hear. The boy took one step closer to Jonathan, then another, before stopping short. He looked up, eyes steady. Jonathan met his gaze. Nothing was said. Under the streetlight, with snow drifting down around them, the past didn't argue or accuse. It simply stood there, watching, waiting to be acknowledged. The warmth hit them first. It wrapped around the children the moment the car doors closed, pulling soft sounds from their throats, tiny breaths released without them realizing it. Elisa felt it too, the sudden contrast almost dizzying after hours of cold that had settled into her bones. She tapped her hands on the twins' shoulders anyway, as if warmth might vanish if she let go. Jonathan sat across from them, posture composed, hands folded loosely, eyes forward. He didn't look at Elisa directly. Not yet. He gave the night space to finish what it had started. No one spoke as the car moved through the city. Street lights slid past the windows, their reflections flickering over the children's faces. The girl, Lily, had already curled against her brother,
eyelids drooping, breath evening out. The boy, Lucas, stayed awake longer, gaze fixed on the dark glass, but even he began to soften, the tension slowly draining from his small frame. They didn't fight the warmth. That, more than anything, unsettled Alyssa. The building Jonathan led them into rose clean and quiet from the street, its entrance glowing softly, guarded by glass and security that asked questions with eyes instead of words. Jonathan answered them with a nod. Doors opened, heat deepened, the world outside receded. Inside the elevator, the twins leaned fully into Alyssa now, exhaustion claiming what fear had held upright. She shifted her weight, adjusting them automatically, her movements practiced. Jonathan watched from the corner of his eye. They moved like children who had done this before, sleeping wherever safety appeared, trusting it would last at least until morning. When the doors opened onto Jonathan's floor, the silence felt deliberate. Plush carpet muted their steps, lights glowed low and warm, nothing harsh, nothing demanding attention. "This is temporary," Alyssa said suddenly. Jonathan stopped at the door to his apartment, hand resting on the handle. He turned to face her fully for the first time. "Just one night," she continued, voice steady but tight. "We'll leave in the morning. I didn't come to—" She paused, jaw tightening. "I don't want anything from you." Jonathan nodded once. "I know." She studied his face, searching for conditions hidden behind politeness, for leverage disguised as kindness. "I'll have a room prepared for them," he said gently. "For them. You'll be nearby." Her eyes flicked toward the children, then back to him. "No questions." "Not tonight." "No expectations?" "Not tonight," he repeated. The emphasis mattered. She hesitated, then nodded. It wasn't trust, it was necessity carefully wrapped to look like acceptance. Inside, the apartment felt lived in but controlled. Clean lines, soft lighting, quiet that wasn't empty, just restrained. Jonathan moved ahead, efficient, unhurried. He gestured toward a hallway, already signaling for staff through a device Alyssa didn't notice. The twins barely stirred as Alyssa laid them down on the wide bed prepared for them. Their bodies relaxed instantly, sinking into warmth and softness with a familiarity that made her throat tighten. Lucas mumbled something incoherent, reaching blindly until Lily's hand found his. They settled together, breathing deep and slow. Too easily. Alyssa brushed hair from Lily's face, then Lucas's. She lingered longer than necessary, watching their chests rise and fall, as if committing the sight to memory. Jonathan stood at the doorway, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't step closer, didn't comment. He understood the boundary without it being spoken. "They sleep like this anywhere," Alyssa said quietly, not looking at him. "When it's warm." Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I'll stay with them," she added, "if that's—" "There's a room for you," he said gently. "Down the hall. You should rest." She almost laughed. Almost. "I've been resting my whole life, just never like this." Jonathan inclined his head, accepting the edge in her voice without pushing back. "I'll be in my office if you need anything." Alyssa straightened, turning to face him fully now. Up close, the years were clearer, the lines near his eyes, the restraint etched into every movement. He looked the same, and yet not at all. "This doesn't change anything," she said. "I know," he replied. Another lie they both needed tonight. As Jonathan stepped away, Alyssa sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting lightly over the twins' joined hands. The room was quiet, safe, too comfortable for the thoughts pressing in at the edges of her mind. In the other wing of the apartment, Jonathan paused, resting his palm briefly against the cool wall. Just one night, he told himself, but the image of the children sleeping, unafraid, unguarded, refused to loosen its grip.
and in the stillness, both of them understood the same unspoken truth. Morning would ask questions the night had allowed them to avoid.
Morning came quietly, not with alarms or urgency, but with pale winter light slipping through tall windows, settling softly across the apartment. Jonathan was already awake. He had been for a while, sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee gone untouched, mind circling the same images it had carried through the night. The children. He heard them before he saw them, small footsteps, a whisper of movement, the faint thud of something dropped and quickly retrieved. He looked up as Alyssa entered the room, Lucas a half step ahead of her, Lily trailing close behind, one hand still clutched in her mother's coat sleeve. They had changed into clothes that fit them too well to be accidental. Jonathan's chest tightened. "Good morning," Alyssa said. "Morning," he replied. Lucas's attention had already fixed on the counter. His eyes tracked the coffee mug, the sleek machine beside it, the precise arrangement Jonathan hadn't even realized was deliberate. "You make that?" the boy asked, nodding toward the machine. Jonathan blinked. "Yes." Lucas studied it for a moment longer, then frowned slightly. "You grind the beans first?" Jonathan felt the question more than he heard it. "Yes," he said slowly. "Always." Lucas nodded, satisfied, as if that answer confirmed something important. He reached for a stool, dragged it closer with effort, and climbed up without asking for help. Jonathan watched the way he did it, careful, efficient, no wasted movement, the same way Jonathan had done things since childhood. Lily, meanwhile, had drifted toward the window. She pressed her hands lightly against the glass, peering out at the city below. When Jonathan shifted, her head turned, eyes flicking toward him briefly before returning to the view. That glance, quick, assessing, curious without being afraid, landed harder than it should have. Alyssa noticed. Of course she did. "Sit," she said softly to the twins. "Both of you." They obeyed without protest. Jonathan poured juice, set it down, then paused. He hadn't asked what they liked. He hadn't needed to. Something had guided his hand anyway. Orange for Lily, apple for Lucas. Lucas picked up the glass, sniffed it once, then took a careful sip, his brow furrowed. "Cold," he said, then added, almost apologetically, "But it's okay." Jonathan swallowed. That was his voice. Not the sound of it, but the instinct behind it, the need to evaluate, to accept without complaint, to manage discomfort quietly. Lily sipped hers without comment, then pushed the glass back into a precise alignment with the edge of the table. Jonathan stared. He did that, always had. Alyssa watched him watch them, tension settling into her shoulders like a familiar weight. "They're observant," she said lightly. Jonathan met her gaze. "They're very observant." Lucas swung his leg slightly, heel tapping the stool in a steady rhythm. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Same tempo, same absent-minded habit. He felt the room closing in. "Where did they learn that?" Jonathan asked, nodding toward Lucas's foot. Alyssa's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes hardened. "They learn things everywhere." Jonathan leaned back slightly, forcing distance between himself and the pull of recognition threatening to overwhelm him. "How old are they?" Jonathan asked. Alyssa hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but he saw it. 5, she said. The math hit him instantly. Clean, brutal. Jonathan's breath caught. He covered it by reaching for his coffee, finally taking a sip. It was lukewarm now. He barely noticed. "Jonathan?" Alyssa said quietly. He looked up. "Don't," she continued. "Not yet." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. "Last night you said no questions. I said not tonight. And it's still morning," she said, voice calm but unyielding. "They don't know anything, and I won't have them hearing guesses dressed as truth." Lucas looked between them, sensing the shift. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. Alyssa immediately softened. "No, sweetheart." Jonathan leaned forward. "You're safe here," he said, meeting Lucas's eyes. "No one's in trouble."
Lucas studied him for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. He turned his attention back to the table, tracing a pattern in the wood grain with his finger. Jonathan watched the motion, the angle, the focus. Fear bloomed quietly in his chest. Not fear of responsibility, not fear of disruption, fear of certainty. He stood abruptly. "I have a call to make," he said, more to the room than to Alyssa. He moved away before either of them could respond, retreating into the quiet of his office. He closed the door behind him and rested his hands on the desk, head bowed. There was no denying it now. The children didn't just resemble him, they mirrored him. And Alyssa, standing in the kitchen with the twins, knew exactly when the truth would break him. Just not yet.
Jonathan didn't make the call. Instead, he sat alone in his office long after the apartment had settled into a gentle rhythm, children's murmurs fading into cartoons playing softly somewhere down the hall, Alyssa's footsteps moving with cautious familiarity, life temporarily contained. He stared at the dark screen of his laptop, reflection faintly visible. For the first time since the message arrived, he wasn't reacting. He was thinking. Jonathan woke the screen with a touch. No assistance, no alerts. Just him and a silence that invited honesty. He navigated folders he hadn't opened in years, files archived not because they were unimportant, but because they were inconvenient. He knew where to look. A private server, a folder labeled 2019, personal, the year Alyssa disappeared. Emails loaded slowly, like reluctant witnesses. Conversations with legal counsel, with the board, with people who never raised their voices, yet somehow always decided outcomes. Jonathan skimmed at first, then slowed. There it was, a thread marked resolved. He opened it. The language was clean, polite, professional. It spoke of risk mitigation, reputational exposure, and future stability. It framed concern as care, interference as protection, and threaded through it all, subtle, consistent, undeniable, was a name, Victor Jacob. Jonathan's uncle hadn't written the most messages, he hadn't needed to. His responses were short, decisive, always positioned as guidance rather than command. Handled. This is in everyone's best interest. Trust me. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He opened another document, an agreement he remembered signing without reading closely, during a week when everything else had been falling apart. The signatures were there, his, Alyssa's, and clauses he didn't remember agreeing to. Non-disclosure, relocation support, legal distance framed as generosity, a choice presented as mercy. Jonathan leaned back slowly, the weight of it settling in his chest. He scrolled further, fingers steady despite the heat rising beneath his skin. More emails, more dates, the same pattern repeating itself with quiet precision. Alyssa had been pressured, cornered, giving limited options wrapped in legal language and delivered with sympathetic concern. And Victor, always Victor, had been copied on every step, guiding the process like a conductor who never touched an instrument. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. It hadn't been a breakup. It had been an extraction. A soft knock sounded at the door. Jonathan didn't look up. Yes? Alyssa stepped in, closing the door gently behind her. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. Her gaze flicked to the screen, to the documents open in front of him. "You found it," she said quietly. He met her eyes. "I found enough." She nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already known would happen. "I didn't want to tell you like this." "You didn't tell me at all." Her lips pressed together. "Because the truth doesn't land softly, and I needed the kids settled before it did." Jonathan exhaled slowly. Victor orchestrated everything. Yes. The simplicity of her answer cut deeper than denial ever could. "He told me it was temporary," Jonathan said, "that you needed space, that it was mutual." Alyssa's expression didn't harden, it went still. "He told you'd already agreed." Jonathan looked back at the screen, at his own signature glaring up at him. "I trusted him." "I know," she said. That's why it worked. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, just heavy with the shape of truth finally named. He framed it as protection, of me, of the company, and of the future, Alyssa added, just not ours. Jonathan closed the laptop with a soft click. How long did he know? Alyssa didn't hesitate. From the beginning. The answer settled like frost. Jonathan stood, pacing once, then stopping. He didn't want children tied to my name before the merger. Alyssa's voice stayed calm. He didn't want me. Jonathan turned to her sharply. She met his gaze without flinching. I wasn't part of the plan he had for you. Jonathan's hands curled at his sides. Anger flared, sharp and focused, not wild, not loud, the kind that sharpened intention. He's still on the board, Jonathan said. Yes, and he doesn't know they're here. Not yet. Jonathan nodded slowly, the pieces aligning with unsettling clarity. This wasn't just a past betrayal resurfacing, it was a system, and systems didn't collapse from emotion, they collapsed from exposure. Down the hall, a child laughed, brief, unguarded. Jonathan turned toward the sound, resolve settling into place. This doesn't happen quietly again, he said. Alyssa watched him closely. What are you going to do? Jonathan met her gaze. I'm going to finish what he started. Her breath caught. Jonathan. On my terms, he added, and this time, no one disappears. For the first time since Alyssa had walked into his apartment, Alyssa allowed herself to believe him. The truth came later that night, after the apartment had gone quiet again. The twins were asleep, their breathing slow and even, bodies sprawled in the careless comfort of children who finally felt safe enough to let go. Jonathan stood for a moment at their doorway, watching the rise and fall of their chests, the faint crease between Lucas's brows that mirrored his own when he concentrated. He closed the door softly. Alyssa was in the living room, sitting at the far end of the couch, hands folded in her lap as if she'd been waiting for this moment. The city glowed faintly through the windows behind her, distant and indifferent. Jonathan didn't sit right away. He poured a glass of water, more to steady himself than because he was thirsty. When he finally turned to her, she was already looking at him. You deserve to hear it without pieces, she said, without files, without your uncle's version. Jonathan nodded. I'm listening. She took a slow breath. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. The words landed quietly, but they rearranged something fundamental inside him. Victor came to me first, not lawyers, not threats, just concern. Her mouth tightened slightly. He told me you were about to step into a future that couldn't afford distractions, that scandals didn't need to be real to be damaging, that love didn't protect men like you, silence did. Jonathan's grip tightened around the glass. He told me if I stayed, Alyssa went on, everything you were building would be questioned, your credibility, your leadership, your inheritance. She met Jonathan's eyes. He told me you'd resent me for it eventually. Jonathan shook his head. He had no right. I know, she said softly, but he wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, voice steady but low. When I told him I was pregnant, he didn't react the way people do. He reacted like a strategist. He told me children tied everything down, that they turned rumors into anchors. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. He offered me a way out, Alyssa said. Support, privacy, distance. He framed it as kindness, as protection, for you. For me, Jonathan repeated, hollow. I believed him, she said, because I knew you trusted him, and because I thought, if I stayed, I'd be the reason you lost everything you'd worked for. Her voice wavered for the first time. She steadied it quickly. So I left. I chose to disappear so your future wouldn't. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. Jonathan stared at the floor, the shape of the truth settling into place with brutal clarity. "I thought you abandoned me," he said quietly. "I thought you agreed." They looked at each other then, the space between them filled with all the years stolen by careful lies and well-timed silence. "Silence wasn't neutral, it was the weapon," Jonathan said slowly. Alyssa nodded. Victor understood that. Jonathan set the glass down with deliberate care. When he looked up again, something had changed. The restraint was still there, but beneath it was resolve, solid and immovable. "I won't let that happen again." Alyssa's breath caught. "Jonathan, I don't mean quietly," he continued, "and I don't mean halfway." He took a step closer. "If protecting them costs me reputation, board seats, influence, then so be it." Her eyes searched his face, wary hope flickering beneath caution. "You don't have to burn your life down." "I'm not burning it. I'm choosing what it's built around." He glanced toward the hallway where the twins slept. His jaw tightened. "I spent years believing distance was strength, that silence kept things stable. I was wrong." Alyssa swallowed. "Victor won't stop." Jonathan almost smiled. "Neither will I." She stood slowly, the weight she'd carried for years easing just enough to let emotion surface. "Once this becomes public," she said, "there's no taking it back." Jonathan met her gaze without hesitation. "Good." For the first time since that wrong message had been sent, the future didn't feel like something to be protected from. It felt like something to stand inside of, openly, deliberately, and together. The strike didn't come loudly. It arrived the way Victor always moved, quiet, precise, wrapped in courtesy. Jonathan was in his office when Marissa called, her voice unusually tight. "You need to see this, now." By the time she arrived, she was already pulling documents from her briefcase, laying them out across the table like evidence from a crime scene. Custody inquiries, motions filed under obscure clauses, requests for emergency evaluations, all framed in the language of concern and responsibility. "Someone is questioning Alyssa's stability," Marissa said carefully, "and by extension, your judgment." Jonathan scanned the pages, jaw set. "Victor." She didn't argue. The media followed within hours, not headlines, whispers, anonymous tips, carefully planted doubts, a billionaire distracted by a sudden family revelation, children introduced to a volatile corporate environment, a woman resurfacing after years of absence. None of it accused, all of it suggested. By evening, Jonathan's phone hadn't stopped vibrating. Board members requesting meetings, advisors urging caution. One even used the word optics. Jonathan turned the phone face down. Victor arrived the next morning, unannounced but expected. He walked into Jonathan's office like he belonged there, immaculate as ever, silver hair neat, expression calm. He didn't sit until Jonathan gestured to the chair across from him. "You are moving quickly," Victor said pleasantly. "That's unlike you." Jonathan leaned back, hands folded. "You taught me to." Victor smiled faintly. "I taught you to think ahead, which is why I'm surprised you didn't." Jonathan didn't rise to it. "What do you want?" Victor crossed one leg over the other. "To prevent damage. To you. To the company." He paused. "To the children." Jonathan's eyes sharpened. "You don't get to say that word." Victor's smile thinned. "This is exactly the kind of emotional response I was hoping to avoid." He slid a folder across the desk. Jonathan didn't open it. "Family court is unpredictable," Victor continued. "Public sympathy is fickle, and women who vanish for 6 years with no record, no stability, well," he shrugged lightly, "judges notice patterns." Jonathan stood. Victor didn't flinch. "Sit down, Jonathan. This isn't a threat. It's a reality." "You created that reality," Jonathan said quietly. Victor sighed as if indulging a misunderstanding. "I managed a situation, one that could have ended your career before it began. You erased my family. I preserved your future." Jonathan leaned forward, palms on the desk. "You used silence to control me, to control her. You don't get to do that anymore." Victor's gaze hardened just a fraction. You think the public wants to believe their golden executive hid children for years, that he suddenly grew a conscience. Jonathan straightened. I don't need them to believe, I need them to see. Victor rose slowly. Be careful, he said, voice calm but firm. Power doesn't disappear when challenged, it adapts. Jonathan met his eyes. So do I. For a moment, they stood there, two men shaped by the same system, now facing each other across a line that could no longer be blurred. Victor adjusted his cufflinks. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. Jonathan nodded once. I am. When Victor left, the office felt colder. That night, Alyssa found Jonathan standing by the window, the city lights fractured against a glass. He didn't turn when she entered. They're coming after the kids, she said softly. Yes, he replied. Indirectly. Her hands tightened at her sides. I knew this would happen. Jonathan finally turned to her. So did I. She searched his face, fear and guilt warring with something like resolve. You don't have to fight him for us. I already am, Jonathan said, and I won't stop. Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware that quiet wars were being waged behind closed doors, wars fought not with shouting, but with documents, influence, and the careful pressure of power pushing back. This time, Jonathan wasn't stepping aside. This time, he was standing in the way. The end didn't arrive with fireworks or raised voices. It came with documents. Jonathan sat at the long conference table as the final folder was placed in front of the board. No speeches, no accusations, just a quiet presentation of facts Victor had spent years ensuring no one ever connected. Shell companies, pressure campaigns disguised as compliance reviews, private settlements routed through third parties, patterns, timelines, intent. When the last page was turned, no one spoke. Victor sat opposite him, composed as ever, but something fundamental had shifted. Control relied on silence, and silence was gone. The chair cleared his throat. Mr. Jacob, he said to Victor, we'll need you to step aside pending a full investigation. Victor didn't look at Jonathan as he stood. He only said, You've changed. Jonathan met his gaze calmly. I stopped mistaking obedience for strength. Victor left without another word. By afternoon, the pressure eased. The legal inquiries dissolved as quickly as they had formed. Anonymous tips dried up as they always did. Alyssa watched it all from a distance, half expecting the ground to give way beneath them. It didn't. That evening, Jonathan took the twins out for coats. Nothing extravagant, just warm, sturdy ones with mittens clipped to the sleeves. Lily insisted on choosing a bright scarf. Lucas picked boots a size too big, so they last. They laughed more than Alyssa expected. As dusk settled, Jonathan drove them back toward the part of the city where it had all begun. The park was quiet, snow softening the edges of everything. Streetlights cast familiar halos across the path. Alyssa recognized the bench before the car even stopped. Jonathan didn't explain. He parked and waited, giving her space to decide. She stepped out first, the cold brushing her cheeks. The twins followed, bundled and curious. The bench sat where it always had, metal, unremarkable, no marker to say what had happened there. Only memory made it heavy. Alyssa sat down slowly, resting her palm on the cold slate. I used to think this was the loneliest place in the city, she said. Jonathan sat beside her. It was. Lucas climbed up between them without asking. Lily followed, tucking her feet beneath her. They leaned into Alyssa instinctively, then, after a brief pause, into Jonathan too. No one shivered. Cars passed, snow drifted down in lazy flakes. The city moved around them, unaware and uninterested, just as it had been that night. The difference now was simple and immense. No one was waiting for rescue. No one was being hidden. Alyssa glanced at Jonathan.
"You didn't have to bring us back here," she said. "I wanted to," he said. "Not to rewrite it, just to close it properly." She nodded, eyes bright but steady. Jonathan looked at the twins, then at the bench. "This is where I almost missed everything," he said quietly. "I won't make that mistake again." Lily slipped her hand into his glove. Lucas leaned his shoulder against Jonathan's arm, comfortable now, unafraid. Alyssa watched them, the last tight knot in her chest finally loosening. The cold still existed. Winter hadn't softened for them, but warmth had found its way back. Not borrowed, not temporary, not conditional. They stood together when it grew late, footprints marking the snow where they had been. Jonathan took Alyssa's hand as they walked back to the car, the twins skipping ahead. The bench remained behind them, just metal and wood again. This time, no one was left behind.